Hey, it's JJ Virgin, and welcome to the JJ Virgin Lifestyle Show, where we'll connect with some of the coolest people in the world. Plus, I give you tips that you can put into fast action to up-level your health and your life. Now, today's show, oh my gosh, I am so excited about this person I have on the show today. I can't stand it. When you have someone on the show that you've just watched for years, and now I'm getting to talk to him. So today we're going to be talking about the mind. And I want you to just think for a second and go, what the heck is the mind? Right? You don't really have a quick answer. And that's what we're going to be talking about, is what is the mind about? I've got Dr. Dan Siegel here with me, and the title of his book that just came out is Mind, A Journey to the Heart of Being Human. It is the stuff he's going to share with you about what he's figured out over the last couple decades on the mind, and then just a simple technique that can dramatically change your mental health is, I'm super excited. So let me tell you a little bit about him if you don't know him. Dan Siegel, MD, is a New York Times bestselling author and the founding editor of the Norton series on interpersonal neurobiology. He's a clinical professor of psychiatry at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA and the executive director of the MindSight Institute. He has got a load of books. He has 3 New York Times bestsellers: Brainstorm, The Power and Purpose of the Teenage Brain, The Whole Brain Child, and No Drama Discipline, and then he's got a bunch of other books as well. What he's known for is making the complicated scientific concepts accessible and exciting, and he's been speaking all over the place, to the King of Thailand, Pope John Paul II, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, at Google, at London's Royal University or Society of Arts. I mean, he's just an amazing, amazing man, and I'm so honored to have him on the show today. So again, today's guest is Dr. Dan Siegel. All right, so let's do it, Dr. Dan Siegel. Welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here with me today.
Great to be here with you, Dr. JJ Virgin.
Oh, thank you. Now, you've got this new book out and called Mind.
Yes.
And, I look at mind and I go, well, what exactly? Because we don't really have a definition, I guess, of mind. What is the book? What's the book about? What's a mind?
Exactly. The book is exactly about that. The fact that we have a word, mind, and when you ask a citizen on the street, they don't have a definite definition. Like they'll say, it's our feelings and our thoughts and our memories, but we actually don't exactly know what those are. And then when you ask professionals, what's your definition of the mind, like someone in psychology or psychiatry or mental health or education, even the field of philosophy of mind, there isn't a definition. So this book is all about, can we offer a definition of the mind, which I offer in the book, and then see if there's scientific support that definition actually offers some value, that it may be perhaps accurate. And if it's accurate, what does it tell us about how to develop a strong and healthy mind?
All right. So how do you go about figuring that out then?
Well, what happened with me was back in 1992, after I was done with my residency training, I started in pediatrics, switched to psychiatry, became a researcher, and then I was the training director in child and adolescent psychiatry. It was the beginning of the decade of the brain. I brought together 40 scientists. And I asked them one question. I said, look, what is the connection between the brain, which we all could define, right? All these neurons up in your head, and the mind? And these 40 scientists in the room could not come to any consensus about what the mind that they would discuss would be. What would you define it as, and how would you connect it to the brain? So in the intervening week before the next meeting, I felt really nervous that this group would just completely fall apart. And I had invited all these people. These were my former teachers. They were now my colleagues, my peers. So I felt really concerned that it wouldn't work. So I thought, what does an anthropologist who studies culture, who was in the room, and a linguist who studies the way, like right now, you and I are speaking to each other with language, and a psychologist who studies memory and thought and emotion, and a psychiatrist who studies disorder, and a neuroscientist, who studies the way the brain functions, what would they have in common, for example, with what a physicist in the room might say, or a computer scientist? And how would you actually say what this mind was? So I was walking on the beach, and the short version of this story was I thought about if someone asked you, let's say, JJ, you and I were walking on the beach, and someone said, "Hey, JJ, hey, Dan, what is this coastline?" And I said, "Well, it's the sand." And you go, "Well, it's the water." And the person goes, "Well, why aren't you two like getting together and saying the coast is both sand and sea?" And in many ways, I thought as I was walking along the beach that that's what was happening in the university, that everyone had their particular, the old story of the Indian blind men and the elephant, the Indian fable, which basically says you study one part of an elephant at a time, and you're very accurate about your part, but you don't see the whole elephant. So I came back to the group the next week with the following definition, saying that the thing that was shared within culture or in groups for sociology or in language as we speak to each other, or even in looking at family relationships. And I was trained as an attachment researcher, so that's what I was trained to do, was energy and information flow. Flow is change. Information is a pattern of energy with symbolic value, and energy has lots of different ways it presents itself as sound, like right now we're speaking to each other with the movement of air molecules, that's energy, or in the brain, it's electrochemical energy flow. So that flow happens inside your body and it happens in your relationship. So I said, what if the system of the mind is energy and information flow that's embodied, not just in your head, but throughout your whole body, and relational? So it's between you and other people or you and the planet. And what if one way of looking at the mind is that this system is what's called a complex system. That's a mathematical term, and it has are called emergent properties. They arise from the elements of the system interacting with each other. There's no programmer like Bill Gates programming Microsoft, emerge. It just happens, which is kind of counterintuitive. And one of the emergent properties is really counterintuitive. It's called self-organization. And what that means is it arises as an emergent property from, in this case, energy and information flow, or if it was a cloud, it would be water molecules and air molecules interacting. But then it turns back and regulates the very stuff from which it's emerging, which is why it's counterintuitive. And I said to the group, okay, here's a definition. See what you guys think about it. Women, men in the room, all these scientists. The emergent, self-organizing, so that's the math property of a complex system. Where is it? It's embodied. It's not just in your head, which of course is what we've been saying since the time of Hippocrates. It's just from the brain. I'm saying it's fully embodied, but you know something? Energy and information flow isn't limited by skull or skin. So I said, this flow is also relational, which made an anthropologist feel good about that. And it regulates, that's what self-organization does, the flow of energy and information that's both within your whole inner world of your body and your relational world. And with that definition, we went around the room. And JJ, because I know you've been in academics like I have, there was 40 out of 40 people that voted yes.
So wait, let's back up for 1 second, because these 40 out of 40 people, because you kind of skated over this. Okay, I got these 40 people together. Why?
So just to give you the context, and this is why I wrote the Mind book with all these kind of stories of how all this stuff unfolded. Back then, in medicine, psychiatry as a branch of medicine, who was really building on this age-old comment that the mind was just brain activity. And the outcome of that view was that all you would do with someone with a mind difficulty, like emotional problems, thinking problems, behavioral problems, is you'd give them a pill. And this kind of was confusing to me because I didn't think that's all that the mind was, and I was trained as a psychiatrist. So for me, I decided to become a researcher in 1989. And when I was done with my research fellowship, they asked me to be the training director. So this was right when I started being a training director. And it was also the beginning of the decade of the brain. So the intellectual climate was we were looking under the skull and saying, oh, look at these beautiful pictures of brain firing. And they would say things like, here's a picture of the mind, as if brain firing were a synonym for mind. And that, from an intellectual point of view, confused me. As a clinician, it really felt wrong. And so what I decided to do was just take my teachers who were in all these different fields of anthropology, linguistics, bring in other people who are interested in this one question: what is the relationship between the brain and the mind?
So you got all these people from all these different areas to come out and do. I mean, that in itself is kind of wild. And then
It's
and
wild. Yeah.
you keep saying it's the decade of the brain,
Yeah,
which
that's a formal term. I think the president at the time, I can't remember who it was, declared that this would be the decade of the brain.
hmm,
And that's a formal name of the 1990s. And there was a lot of money put into brain science, and it was fantastic. We were developing, first it was PET scans, then we developed
hmm.
MRIs, and then functional MRIs, and of course we had CAT scans, but you couldn't see function with that. So it was a very exciting time. But for me, looking into the research of this, writing this book, Mind, Hippocrates said the same thing 2,500 years ago. So my interest in bringing these 40 people together, who included physicists. There were people in the room that were into computer science. There were all sorts of folks.
I'm so impressed you could get them all together.
Well, here's what happened with that definition. You know how long we stayed together? 4.5 years.
Wow.
It was intellectual heaven, because with that definition, an anthropologist could speak respectfully to a neuroscientist, who could speak respectfully to a linguist. We were all on the same page, so to speak, because energy and information flow can be studied in a culture, and it can be studied in a cortex.
So bringing all these people together and getting this definition
Yeah.
and realizing that the mind is more than just brain activity up in your head, it's more than just brain. What was the outcome?
So here's the immediate outcome. With that definition, first of all, the group stayed together, which was really cool. But the most immediate outcome for me as a therapist, I'm a psychiatrist who practices psychotherapy, was to ask the next question, which is, if that definition of the mind is true, if it's accurate, if it's valid, then the next reasonable question to ask is, how do you optimize self-organization? And then when you look into the math of that, here's what it says. Optimal self-organization, first of all, has these 5 qualities that, if you rearrange it, it spells the word faces. So it's flexible, F, adaptive, A, coherent, these are math terms, C, that means holding well together over time. So it's a form of mathematical way of describing resilience. So coherent. E is it's energized, and S is it's stable. So when I saw that, I said, oh my God, that's such a beautiful definition of mental
Mm-hmm.
health. Now, I hadn't ever seen any definition of mental health, so I can't say it's the best. It's just the only one I saw, and it was from math. And then the next thing that the math said, which blew my mind, was when self-organization is impaired, you go to either chaos or you go to rigidity, or some combination of the two. And I had already noticed that in my patients, that I know it didn't fit with what I was taught, but for example, if someone came in with trauma, the chaos would be flooding
Mm-hmm.
their inner world with memories of the trauma or feelings of the body, or the rigidity would be shutting down and feeling demoralized and literally feeling numb. Or that's related to experience. You could have something like manic depressive illness, not caused by experience, but the chaos of mania and the rigidity of depression, on and on. I went through every symptom of every syndrome of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, the Bible of mental health. And every one of those symptoms could be reinterpreted as chaos or rigidity. So then I said, well, how do you create optimal self organization? And the answer is so simple that when I've had interns work with me, I said, please, please, please disprove this, because it is so simple, it can't be true. And they would say, what do you mean disprove? I said, yeah, anyone could get one thing to support what they're saying. Find one thing that disproves this. And here's the simple statement. Optimal self-organization is created with the differentiation, making special, of aspects of a system, and then linking them together. And though that's for math, and math doesn't have a common name for that, we can use the common word integration to define it very simply as you differentiate and then you link the differentiated parts. And the important thing there is it's not blending, it's not homogenizing. You maintain the differences more like, a fruit salad rather than a smoothie. You're not blending everything up.
Hmm.
This is where the phrase comes from. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So here's the beautiful thing. Integration creates the phases flow, flexible, adaptive, coherent, energized, and stable. So back in 92, here was the suggestion I made to the group. Mental health, and maybe even all health, comes from integration. And 24 years later, now that I've written this book, Mind, the data that would support that, you never say prove, of course, you want to just always say support and see what happens as we keep on going forward. But here's what we know. We know that every study of any psychiatric disorder in terms of looking at the brain has so far revealed impaired integration. Autism, schizophrenia, manic depressive illness, those individuals have impaired integration of the brain. And that's not from what experience caused. But if you look at severe abuse and neglect, its outcome is impaired integration. So this is consistent with the finding that all of those conditions have chaos or rigidity. And then a study came out in October 2015 by the International Human Connectome Project. And we have an online program. One of our online students called us and she said, "Hey, have you guys seen this study?" And we hadn't seen it yet. So she sent us the link. And the study basically says this, that across many countries, they took every variable of well-being that they could imagine and then studied the brains of the individuals who they surveyed. And one brain factor correlated with well-being. And the way they describe it is it's the interconnections of the connectome. What that means is how are the differentiated areas of the brain linked? In other words, how integrated the brain is the best predictor of every variable of well-being they could find.
Well, how do they determine that?
Oh, well, there's a new set of studies that you can do with advanced technology. One part of it is called diffusion tensor imaging, DTI. And what you do, unlike a functional MRI where you're just looking at blood flow changes with activity, with DTI, what you're doing is you're using magnets, yes, but you're shaking the liquid so that you can actually get these incredible pictures of the structural connections that are very small that link the differentiated areas of the brain. We could never do that before. So even if you look at, let's say, mindfulness meditation, if you said to me, "Hey, Dan, how would you summarize all the research of the brain of mindfulness meditation?" We're on an elevator ride, right? Floor 2 to floor 5. I go, "Oh my God, JJ, here it is. Mindfulness meditation, all the research of the brain shows makes the brain more integrated."
This is like super cool because what I'm imagining then is so now you can test to see how integrated a brain is.
Mm-hmm.
That is really going to, you know, kind of show where someone is kind of on their scale of mental health. And then there's ways that you can train them, you can correlate it. And then there's ways from like maybe tapping and meditation, neurofeedback that you could actually train them to increase this integration.
Exactly. Couldn't say it more beautifully or simply. Absolutely. So if someone's had head injury, for example,
I'm listening hard here
yes,
now, as you
yes,
know.
you want to find ways where the injury from either the direct impact or the inflammation that followed the impact has impaired integration, and then do integrative mental practices.
When is this going to be common medicine, though? You know, and I will share with you that when my son was in the ICU and they did, um, they said there really isn't any way to really see this. I think they did in EEG at the time, and then I went and had Daniel Amen SPECT scan him, and we've had him brain mapped, but no one's talked about this. I haven't heard this from anybody.
It is a new way to think, and it's I think part of why I wrote the Mind book was just to lay out in a set of questions, really, for the reader to not be just given a download of information, but to experience it really from the inside out. I'm asking all these questions and involving the reader almost like we're in a conversation, over a long, long, long lunch, to say, hey, is this your experience? And look at this, and hear the research here, but what's your experience? Here's the experience I had. And putting it together like that.
So can the questions, they're not going to take the place of, but can they actually like help you determine the level of how integrated your brain is? Can those questions do that?
Yeah, so here's a couple of things just to lay out. One is when we talk about the mind, we're talking absolutely about the brain, but then we're also talking about the whole body. So, like your work on endocrinology is super important, our exposure to toxins super important, the bacteria in our intestines super important. So we want to talk about the whole body, but then we also want to talk about the relationships in which a person lives, the immediate relationships we have with friends and family,
Mm-hmm.
but then the larger setting, our neighborhood, our culture, and how integrated it is. So
Yeah.
so here's so that's when we're thinking about the mind, we want to think in these larger terms. And then one way to really imagine it is this. Let's say someone, is struggling to belong. Like I just was up in Northern California doing some public speaking where sadly, some there's been a rash of suicides among the high school students. And one of the goals of adolescent brain development that I read about in Brainstorm, is that the brain become more integrated. But if you grow a kid up in a culture where the only thing that has meaning is the elitism of the school you get into, then the fact is it's not an integrated way to live. It's there's something quite rigid about that, right?
Well, it's also competitive, and you're actually it's almost anti, because what you're saying here is the mind is not just, it's not your brain, it's your whole body, but it's not just your body, it's outside in you communicating with other people, and it's not just the integration of your mind and body, but the integration of you with other people.
Exactly.
And therefore, now if you're in competition to get into the best school, you've just shut down a big part of that integration.
Right. And with that shutdown, life is meaningless and you jump in front of the train. It's so sad. What was empowering about it, because I had a lot of adolescents in the room as well as their parents and teachers, is I said, let's collectively rethink what we're doing because we've come down a road of massive increased stress and this massive sense of meaninglessness and hopelessness, but we don't have to continue living like that. And what I tried to do in my talk with them, and it was so powerful to be there with the parents, the teachers, and the adolescents themselves, is say, let's cut out the madness, get good sleep, get good exercise, have relationships. The research is really clear. You don't need more than a couple hours of homework. It doesn't do you any good. And by the way, you don't need to go to some big fancy elite school to have any kind of increased probability of positive things in your life, whether it's achieving success, with attributing, contributing to the world, or getting finances, or being happy, or having relationships. So I really tried to speak to them from the science of it to say, we have the ability to use our minds in our relationships and the way our brain functions, to rethink this and create more well-being by creating more integration. And that's the exciting thing. So to answer your question, the way you would look for it is there chaos in your life or someone you care about's life? And is there rigidity? And if so, that's a sign that there's impaired integration either in the relational world or in the brain world or the body world. And then once you figure out where the integration is impaired, because it could just be in the culture that someone's surrounded by, right? And then you need to work at that level. So, in a book called Mindsight, I talk about these 9 domains of integration, but it's really kind of fun because it makes it really clear, okay, there's somewhere where integration is paired. All I have to do is look at chaos and rigidity. I don't need to do a brain scan. And then you go, okay, I think it's a brain issue. Fine, then do a brain scan. But sometimes it's a relationship issue.
Uh-huh. Oh, no, I'm thinking about everybody I know that with rigidity issues where I've seen this going on. And I just am thinking of my son right now who's got, going through this brain injury and the rigidity stuff that's happened. And a lot of the issues he's had now is through social isolation.
Exactly.
And, not like that whole idea of your mind being this flowing organism that also is, impacted by those others around you. That's how you integrate. That makes complete sense. So
Exactly. Right.
fascinating stuff. And I love the fact that you can go through and self-identify using these books, because I would imagine most of the tools that are going to help you integrate would be things like social interaction, not being on social media, and getting out there and doing things like Tai Chi and meditating, and just the stuff that we've gotten so far away from that
That's
we need
right.
to get back to, like gardening. One of the things that's helped my son the most is just going out and getting in the dirt and working in the dirt.
He's connecting with nature, and that's a relational integration he's doing.
He's actually gone through and created these things himself, and I've been watching him do these activities. I'm like, that is so interesting. Things he was never interested in before that he's using to heal himself.
Integration that can heal. Integration is the base of healing. Integration creates the capacity for optimal regulation. That's the amazing thing. And that happens both in our bodies, including the brain. The brain is great, but it's not the end of the story. It's the whole body, but it's not the body alone. It's also our relationship world. So what your son is doing with nature is not just, like icing on the cake. It is the cake. Our relationships are part of where our mind emerges. And when you put integration into the mix, it's absolutely amazing. The science supports this in so many exciting ways, and the practical applications of it are so rewarding, because basically you've heard the whole thing: chaos or rigidity, impaired integration. Find out where integration is impaired, and you can do something with your mind to create embodied and relational integration.
There you have it. Genius. And super simple when you really
Super
get down
simple.
to it. Super simple when you put it all together. So thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for your work. It's just fantastic.
Oh, my
I've heard
pleasure.
your name forever, and I was so excited to get you on this podcast. And for everyone listening, you can go to jjvirgin.com/Dr. Dan Siegel. Let me spell his last name, and it's Dr. Dan Siegel, Dr. Dan Siegel.
SIE.
And
Yeah.
Siegel, right?
Yeah.
Siegel. And we'll have it in the show notes too. And I know you just went and did a deep dive into the book, Mind, A Journey to the Heart of Being Human. And you're going to give that video to everyone listening. And I'm super thrilled with that.
That's great. It's an audio tape. And just to get you prepared, we talk about the integration of consciousness. And I just completed a 10,000 person study where I report the results in the book, but also I report it in this 2-hour audio that you'll hear. But it takes you to some really exciting places. And JJ, if you get a chance to either listen to that or read the book, let me know what you think, because
It's not an or, it's a both. I'm doing both.
excellent.
This is
So
excellent.
then we'll say to be continued, because when you see
Yes.
the nature of consciousness, it becomes so profoundly interesting and exciting, even to a deeper level of like, what is time? Who are we? What's our identity? And what are our connections to each other really all about?
Awesome. Thank you so much. It has been fantastic. I hugely appreciate it. All right, now after the break, I'm going to be answering a listener's questions, so stay with me.
You already know starting your day off with the right breakfast sets the metabolic tone for your day. And now, the perfect and easiest way to do this is with the JJ Virgin's all-in-one paleo-inspired protein shake. This convenient, nutrient-rich, protein-enhanced meal comes in 2 delicious flavors, vanilla and chocolate, and is a huge time saver, ensuring your body uses stored fat as fuel, creates steady, sustained energy, and cuts your hunger and sugar cravings. Visit jjvirgin.com/products today and experience the easy way to lose more weight and keep it off. Visit jjvirgin.com/products and start your day with a healthy shake.
Welcome back. This is the time where I answer a listener's question, and today's question comes from Bob in Aurora, Illinois. And Bob asked, JJ, I know you've talked a lot about your son's brain injury. I'd like to know what you've done to help him heal. All right, so Bob, I'm actually working on putting this all together in a document because there's been a lot of things that we've been doing to help my son heal from his brain injury. And some of these things have worked really well, some haven't done so much. So what I'm going to share with you today are some of the biggest needle movers that I've seen that have helped. Now, the first thing that we started to do in the hospital was to give him high-dose fish oil. And this is one that I would highly recommend. A great resource for this is Dr. Michael Lewis, who wrote When Brains Collide. So high-dose fish oil, I think the recommended dose there is about 10 grams. We went to 20 grams. And then once he was out of the hospital, we went down to 10 grams and then tapered him to 5 grams, where he is now 4 years later. The next thing that we did was hyperbaric oxygen treatments, and the recommended dose on those is 30 to 40 of these hyperbaric oxygen treatments. The next thing that we did was neurofeedback, and we do that ongoing still today, some neurofeedback. And then we also have him on CBD oil. That has helped tremendously with stabilizing his mood. And then we are now just starting stem cells that we had harvested. They're growing and they're being injected right into his spine. And we've been seeing tremendous change with that. Now we're playing around with a copper wire device that has an electromagnetic current that helps heal his brain. So we'll be putting all of that together for you. You can go to grantvirgin.com right now and get a guidebook of some of the things that we did in the hospital. But again, I am continuing to work on this. This is my life's passion and purpose now, is to get more information out. So I will continue to share with that. So make sure that you are part of the community. And if you'd like to submit a question, you can just head over to my Facebook page at JJ Virgin Fan Club. And I have a favor to ask. I would hugely appreciate it if you would jump on Stitcher or iTunes and leave a review for me. It helps a bunch. And be sure to subscribe and share the show with your friends. This is JJ Virgin signing off and reminding you to live courageously. Show up. Step up. You are stronger than you think.